House of Representatives is talking about getting rid of the ATF.
The Second Amendment to the United States Constitution plainly states, quote, "The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Ever since Mr. Biden took office, his administration has actively sought to infringe on this right. And I'm deeply concerned that the ATF and their recent actions against firearms manufacturers, federal firearms licenses, or FFLs, and law-abiding Americans who wish to procure and use firearms. Under the Biden administration, the ATF has been weaponized against gun owners and Americans who wish to acquire firearms in numerous ways in recent years.
They had a hearing on it just the other day. It got a little bit contentious. We'll talk about that with noted criminal defense attorney Tom Grieve. But first, I'll let you know that we have a super secret giveaway going on. It's happening right now. It is absolutely free, but it does end really soon. I'm not even allowed to tell you what it is. I can't say the word. But if you click on the link in the description down below, you can learn which of these things you could win. Tom, we chatted before this. You said you didn't get to watch much of the hearing. You were very busy doing lawyer stuff. And so I watched most of the hearing because I was not busy at all. We were just cleaning the studio, and I clicked on YouTube and watched what was going on. But it was a House of Representatives committee hearing discussing ATF overreach of all things.
Of all things.
Yeah, it went, as you would imagine, all over the place. At one point, the chairman of the hearing said, "I assumed we would be insulted, and I was not wrong." So that was great because there was one of the folks testifying was from Everytown, and he was ridiculed strongly by some Republican members of the committee, but then the Democrats were patting him on the back about all the Lord's work that he was doing. A lot of discussion about the SB brace, the brace on AR-15 style pistols, and a lot of what they talked about, and this went back and forth over the course of almost 4 hours apparently, does the brace on your AR pistol make it any more deadly? That was the discussion. And one really cool point was a short barrel rifle is just the most dangerous thing in the world until you give the ATF $200, and then it's just fine. You can have it, and now it's okay. So in your estimation, a brace on an AR pistol, is it making it any easier to conceal? Is it making the firearm any more deadly? Is it making it any more likely that someone is going to use it to commit crimes?
Well, a lot loaded in there. It's going to definitely make it less concealable as compared to if you just have a pistol buffer tube or something like that.
Right.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a former state prosecutor, criminal defense attorney. My experience with felons, particularly those that are intent on committing more crime, right? Because there's lots of felons who have, they made some juvenile mistakes and they've moved on with life. But for those of them who have continued to live the lifestyle, they don't seem to really care too much, in my personal experience, about if they're going to go rob someone or break into someone's home or do some horrible violence, let alone actually plan on using a firearm to kill someone. The semantics of, did it come with a pistol brace? Did it come with, or can I throw a stock on it, or like a rifle stock or something like that? Those details, they don't seem to be things that they're too bothered by.
Yeah, and there was some discussion that in a couple instances, folks had used a short-barreled AR equipped with one of these braces in a mass shooting. And I think they listed 2 or 3 different instances where that happened over the past several years. And certainly that is a tragedy, but I don't believe that is what caused the mass shooting or even what facilitated the mass shooting, the fact that this pistol brace was there. Lots and lots of talk about the fact that for 10 years, the pistol brace was considered completely legal, and why did the ATF change their mind? I will point out, no one from the ATF showed up at this hearing, and the person speaking on behalf of the ATF appeared to be from the Everytown group, and he made some pretty outlandish statements, and at one point was accused of not knowing anything when they were talking about firearms kits. But the long and short of this entire incident was is the ATF overreaching? And are they making an entire group of people, could be as many as 40 million of these braces out there, and I believe it's May 31st or something like that.
End of May.
Yeah, anyone who owns them suddenly is committing a felony if they are equipped, if the firearm is so equipped. I know that you had talked at length about what people should do with their pistol brace. What is it that the ATF is telling us we should do right now?
I'm going to answer that question, but I want to touch on something that you said earlier, which was the fact that a couple of these pistol braces have turned up as part of crime scenes, including a few, I don't know if it's 2 or 3 mass shootings or something like that. Yep. If you make a car, it's going to be used for drunk driving. If you make a weapon, someone bad is going to use it. I mean, it's the tool that's available to them when they want to do something. So the fact that someone, someplace, sometime has used it to commit an act of evil, to me doesn't speak to whether or not we have to ban it, because by that logic, we should outlaw drugs, right?
Yes,
because
absolutely.
heroin, crack cocaine, so forth, this is associated with lots of bad things. Alcohol, same deal, right? Cars, that's used to kill people. Far more people die in car accidents than as a result of firearm-related homicides. If you actually just look at the statistics, I believe more people are killed by bees in the United States each year than an AR-15.
And we have an entire movement to save the bees. I just want to point that out.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think if you look at the statistics and if we use some reason, you reach a very, to my mind, different conclusion of, well, because someone once did something with it and there's possibly tens of millions in circulation, therefore it is intrinsically evil and we must do something, right? You could also use the exact same explanation to ban virtually every book out there, particularly any political one, because virtually someone has used something as a reason, some book as a reason to, whether it's religious, political, or whatnot, in order to exact some measure of evil. And obviously some a lot more than others. But anyway, my point is that I think that's a specious argument, and I think it's a logical fallacy of saying because someone did something once, therefore the whole thing is bad. But that's neither here or there.
Yeah, I don't think logic had a lot to do with the discussions from particularly from the left, as we were talking about getting rid of.
And I look at principles and I look at statistics. That's kind of the way that I look at things. But that wasn't the question you asked me, right? Like a good attorney and maybe like a good politician, which I'm not, thankfully, a politician. But
not yet.
No. I had to completely pivot to talk about what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay, so your question was basically, what do I think people should do? Was that what you asked me?
Well, not what you think people should do. What has the ATF directed us to do with our braces, our pistol braces, or our pistols equipped with braces?
Yeah.
And what have they asked us to do?
In essence, register, destroy, fix, or turn in.
Okay.
So register, there's of course a limited period, 120-day amnesty starting from the end of January, where you can jump through some hoops. They waive the $200 tax fee, and you can now register it as an SBR, short barrel rifle, assuming you live in one of the states where you can lawfully do that.
That allows you to have a short barrel rifle. And they showed me the Form 1 at this hearing, 17 pages of telling you how to fill out the form. And they also did a little bit of math based on the current number of SBR requests that are going through the ATF, which... And here's something that really struck me. At $200 a piece, the ATF is making millions upon millions of dollars, because a short barrel rifle is apparently the most dangerous thing in the world until you give the government $200. Right. Then you can have it and it's fine.
Until someone can make some money on it.
Right, and then you can have it and it's fine. But if we even took a mid-range of 20 million of these SB stocks, of these pistol brace stocks, it would take the ATF, at their current rate of approval, 76 years to approve all of the stocks, which they could possibly get registered if a large group of people decided they were going to register as short barrel rifles.
And I don't know if it's true, but someone once told me, someone reputable once told me that the two wings of the U.S. government, and again, I'm sure there's more to this, but I think the premise is there's something to this. The two wings of the U.S. government, the two divisions of the U.S. government that actually make money are the Patent Office and the ATF, Title II, Form 1s, Form 4s, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Those are the two wings that actually generate profit, in essence, for the government.
And they're apparently generating all sorts of profit. Discussion in the hearing, as you can imagine, sometimes got raucous. While I was watching, they had to call for a recess because someone in the gallery had an outburst, was escorted out, and then there was a further outburst in the hallway. And at one point, the chairman of the committee hearing asked if this was an insurrection. It got some laughs from some side of the room and other areas. But it came back around to what is the ATF doing, and are they overreaching? And as that moved forward, the discussion of pistol kits. Specifically, the company Polymer 80 was mentioned very specifically about these pistol kits that they can send out and you can complete at your house, and then you have a gun that does not have a serial number. And one of the representatives was asking about whether or not the ATF now wants to, instead of controlling firearms and things that are listed as firearms, wants to control just simply pieces of metal or polymer. And at what point does a piece of metal which could be fashioned into a firearm become something that the ATF gets to regulate with the force of law without any legislative oversight, without any laws actually being written? And we're subject to these ATF rules as if they are laws, right? If I violate an ATF rule, even though it's not a law, if I violate an ATF rule, I'm held liable and I could go to prison, right?
Yes, because they're going to be making the interpretations of so here's the flow chart for all this, right? Congress passes a statute, right? So that's law.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you interpret and enforce this? So that gets delegated, going back to your 8th grade civics class, to the executive branch, which the ATF and other law enforcement is basically a member of. So ATF will then come up with different rulings and policy of this is how we're going to interpret this is how we're going to interpret that. The specific issue at play here is the fact that, so Congress, when they passed the Gun Control Act, they said that, look, here's what a firearm is, right? It's something that, and this is not literal verbatim, but it's close. It's an item that expels a projectile by use of explosive, okay? And we're also going to call silencers a firearm, and we're also going to call destructive devices a firearm, and we are also going to call frames and receivers a firearm. There's a little bit more to that whole thing, so that's not an exhaustive list, but that's the short to it. Congress, however, did not define what a frame or receiver is, and we've got decades now with the ATF saying frame or receiver, that's effectively, X, that it's this, right? And something becomes a frame or receiver when you hit basically the 80% assembly mark. So when it's 80% or more completed for the assembly, whether that's a polymer, plastic, whether that's metal or whatever the case may be, that's where we're at. So,
and that's when it has to be serialized and listed and
correct. And, okay. Now it's going to be subject to the Gun Control Act of 1968 and any other requisite gun control laws that are out there, firearm laws that are out there, which means that if you are an FFL, Federal Firearms Licensed Dealer, that's where it now has to go into your bound book. You've got to do background checks of 4473, all that kind of good stuff. So what had happened though is that you have companies like Polymer 80, right, who said, well, okay, what if we sell basically something that's less than 80%? We're gonna set up a business where we're operating underneath and entirely within the shadow and within the lines that the ATF has given us.
And in full view. They're not doing this in secret.
Oh, far from. Yeah. The opposite. They got permission, I believe, from memory, in 3 separate occasions from the ATF saying, yep, you're good to go, this is good to go, everything is good to go, where they basically will sell, not as firearms, but just as unregulated hunks of plastic, these devices or these hunks of plastic that are not yet 80% complete. And you can buy jigs and molds and so forth to obviously manufacture those from home into something that can then, in essence, function as a frame, because we're talking about handguns, and ATF has said frames are handguns, receivers are long arms. And now they decided, as of 2022, the ATF said, nope, no longer can do that. And at what percentage level does a frame or receiver turn into a firearm? Well, they're no longer using percentages. Rather, they came up with an 8-fold criteria of what they are going to look at in conjunction with how the devices are marketed, used, and sold to determine whether or not this hunk of plastic or metal is going to be a firearm.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
And therefore needs to have its serial number.
And therefore now
all
it needs
the
a
other hoops.
And becomes a felony. So the issue here, that what's going on, and recently the Northern District Court of Texas actually put an injunction on the ATF from enforcing their frame receiver ruling in the case of Polymer 80 v. Garland. That just came out around March 21st from memory, or 19th, something like that. They said, look, you can't just go ahead and reinterpret and add to what Congress has already defined, okay?
Right.
And not only because you've been doing it this way for 3 decades, but you are overstepping your legally designated authority as an executive branch bureau to suddenly just define things into something that's entirely new and different. You're overstepping your boundaries. That's really the heart of what's going on here. I mean, it's yes, there's gun control and so forth, and there's a Second Amendment claim, but what we're seeing turn out in the lawsuits is actually a procedural issue of an administrative agency that's overstepping their delegated authority by taking the goalposts and moving them back like 80 yards.
And a lot of what was discussed in this hearing, I heard it come up several times, was whether or not influencer groups, and in this case Everytown, had met with anyone at the ATF prior to this change in idea of what a brace is and how it applies. And the gentleman who was testifying on behalf of Everytown admitted that, yes, they'd had some phone calls. They'd talked to some people. He was squirming around a lot trying to dodge that question, but it became very clear that this is all just a shift in the political winds. That's all that it was we've got a new administration in place. And a couple of people pointed out, well, some things happened during the Reagan administration, some things happened during the Trump administration. And to their credit, the representative said, yeah, we understand in the past that bad things happened to gun rights under Republican administrations, but I'm asking today, who did you speak to and what's going on? And in your estimation, is this something that gun owners need to be politically active about? Because we're facing right now the prospect of, again, with Polymer 80 and with the people who are making gun braces, not only 4 of the 5 businesses going out of business by the ATF's own estimate, but the idea that the ATF is going to change the rules so often that we might end up becoming felons just by the stuff that we owned that was clearly and overtly legal in the past, and now we wake up one morning and it's like, this is not legal anymore. You can't have this.
Yeah, I mean, in essence, it's so many things happening at once. You have a taking for the folks who can't register their pistols in SBR. You have an incredibly overbearing laws and rules that attach to a device once it becomes an SBR. You can't travel across state lines. Even if you come from a state where it is lawful to have, you cannot travel across state lines unless you get advance permission from the ATF by filing paperwork. The laws change if you actually do use that firearm in self-defense. If you get convicted, there's extra federal qualifiers and enhancers that will add to your penalty range. There is, from a legal perspective, no advantage whatsoever from transferring this from being ruled as a pistol to an SBR. There are tons of legal disadvantages that for the vast majority, not all, there's a couple exceptions, but for probably 99% of folks, will lose out economically, devalue their items in a situation where the ATF gave people multiple approvals going all the way back to 2012 saying that this is entirely okay. And now, hey, there's been a political shift in the winds. If we did this with any other aspect of American life, I mean, let's just talk about cars, right? I mean, this would be kind of like saying, oh, well, we have a new president, so hey, everybody who doesn't own a hybrid or electronic vehicle, you've got 120 days to turn them in.
Yeah.
Right?
Or destroy them.
Right, or destroy them or something like that. Now, obviously, that's an extreme example, But we are living in an extreme example right now with what the ATF is doing, because if you do not comply, 10 years prison per device.
Yeah, and $250,000 fine. I mean, this is...
And in my experience, the people who I talk to, because as you can imagine, I get lots of calls. The people I talk to who have these devices very rarely have one. They very often have 2, 3, 4, sometimes double digits. I just talked to someone earlier on this week, so just several days ago, who had no idea this was going on. He owns, I think, as I recall, 3 or 4 of these devices. He was aware that there was something people were talking about, but had done nothing to look into it and so forth. And I had to say, yeah, buddy, you've got like 60 days to not go to prison for potentially, I think he had 3 devices for about 30 years.
Yeah.
Right. This is like a recall on a car, except what's the notice? You have to be paying attention. You know, I've talked to folks, of course, who live out in more rural areas where they're not on the internet every single day. You know, it's not like this is something that's going out in every single front page newspaper all the time. There's going to be a 100% chance that there's going to be good guys going to prison because of some political shift in the winds here, which is insane.
Yeah, and this was happening at the same time as the hearing about TikTok. So this actual firearms hearing, with all that goes along with it, kind of got buried in the news cycle that the news outlets weren't talking about this.
Imagine that.
It was, yeah. Can you imagine, you know, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. It's that sort of stuff going on there. So to kind of wrap this all up and put a bow on it, this is not legal advice. This is not legal advice. I'm telling you guys right now, this is not legal advice. What are you suggesting? I'm kind of in the wait and see category here. I know we got about 60 days left. If I were to own such a device,
hypothetically,
if I were to come into possession of one, I would kind of want to know what I should maybe do with such a device. And are you advising people one way or the other, or just telling them to pay attention and do something?
So here's where I fall down on this. I mentioned before that the vast majority of people are getting screwed under this, right? There's about 1% of folks who arguably could benefit from this. I'm talking specifically down the lens to you HK and CZ owners. The reason why is because the ATF has already come out and said that you do not need to worry about 922R issues if you are going to SBR your pistol brace. Now, I don't want to get this super into the weeds, but the gist to it is that ordinarily these days, if you do want to SBR an HK or a CZ, you're going to have to swap in basically at least 10 US-made parts, which generally speaking, the word on the street and the reputation out there is you would much rather have the CZ and the German-made parts, the HK parts, not the US parts. Now I realize you can get into binary kits and all that kind of stuff, and you can get a handful of US parts, but the premise remains that probably less than 1% of people arguably are advantaged because it gets them through the 922R component. But for everyone else, there's nothing, there's no upside to this. Now, there is an upside to not going to prison for 10 years.
Yes.
So
that's pretty obvious.
We have to put that on the table. I actually know someone, and I did an interview on my channel with one of the lead attorneys in one of the lead lawsuits. We are expecting, hopefully, the judge's ruling on an injunction to come down the pipes any day on this. So to your point, let me just tell you what I've done, which again, not legal advice. What I've done is I have prepped my Form 1s in the the ATF pipeline online, right? But I have not filed or submitted them yet because I want to see what's going to happen here. But I also don't want to go to prison, and I understand that there's a mass noncompliance political argument. Totally get that. Not pushing against that. But as an attorney, I can't help people from behind bars.
Right.
So I'm in a little bit of a different situation. So I am preparing to go down that road myself. I'm getting all my ducks in a row. But I mean, look, it's also illegal, and I can lose my bar license if I told somebody to do something that's illegal.
Yeah.
So it is impossible for me to tell people don't comply.
Yeah,
I can't do
we
that.
are not telling you
Right.
to not comply with this law. We are giving you all of the options that are available to you out there now, and apparently none of them are good.
No, they aren't. And I do expect a large percentage of folks to not comply. That's what I do anticipate. We saw that with the bump stock ban where, it was something like, I don't know, and it was like 1% or 10% of the devices were turned into the ATF.
Yeah.
And there was no registration under that. There was no so-called amnesty under that. So in other words, the devices had to be destroyed or turned in. That was it. And I think they saw 536 devices or something turned in out of however many it was, right? I mean, many tens of thousands. So I expect now whether or not the percentage it winds up being 10%, 20%, 50%, 70%, I don't know. Part of the issue here is as well as we don't know how many devices are out there. The ATF gave radically lower numbers than what the Congressional Research Office gave. ATF said there's a handful of millions. Congressional Research Office gave a number that's 10 to 40 million or something like that. So we can't even agree on the amount of numbers here. But I think this is going to be settled by the U.S. Supreme Court is honestly where I see this going.
And what we can agree on is that the criminals aren't going to be following this rule anyway.
Oh, God, no.
It's, I put it this way in another recent video. The ATF is not going into West Baltimore, going house to house and saying, are all your guns registered? That's not where they're looking to get these guns registered. They're going to Waukesha, Wisconsin, where they know there's a whole bunch of Republicans with ARs with stocks on, with pistol braces on them. So I don't see this as something that's going to reduce crime. I see this something that's making a group of people into criminals because now they might own a gun equipped with this product.
I would call this the epitome of feel-good legislation, but it's not even legislation.
Yeah.
It's rulemaking, and it's a vast overstep. And hopefully we'll get a favorable U.S. Supreme Court decision telling us that it's also unconstitutional on its face because accessories are protected by the Second Amendment, which right now, you asked a question earlier of should folks be political? Is this a wake-up call? Here's what's at stake, because I know a lot of people may be feeling a little bit complacent. If you're not tuning in all the time, some folks may be feeling complacent about, well, we've won Heller, we've won McDonald, we've run Brune. What's there left to win? What are the battles ahead? Oh my gosh, there are so many battles ahead, critical battles ahead that could determine whether or not you're allowed to have, are you stuck with a 5-shot J-frame, or are you allowed to have a so-called high capacity, i.e. normal capacity magazine, or so-called assault weapons protected by the Second Amendment, or are we only talking about your uncle's shotgun, right? Yeah. Now, to my mind and your mind, we obviously know the answer to these questions, and I would also say that the U.S. Supreme Court, in cases like U.S. v. Miller going back to the 30s, has already addressed these questions, but that doesn't change the fact that anti-2A states are going to keep legislating to these points until the U.S. Supreme Court has to play a vicious game of whack-a-mole.
Yeah,
so,
and all of those court cases that you mentioned, those were not the end. Those were the beginning.
That's
of
right.
All of the stuff that's going to happen over probably the next 10 years. I mean, we're going to be seeing this for a while.
10 years and beyond, and the U.S. Supreme Court is that's going to be the kingmaker on where everything is, and that's controlled by who is the president.
Yeah, absolutely. Like they say, elections have consequences. So,
absolutely.
Thanks again for your insight, Tom. Always great to talk to you. Truly appreciate it.
Thanks, Kevin.
It's a true story of self-defense. We interviewed an armed Lyft driver who was carjacked to help answer these questions. Should I carry a gun while driving? And what does a carjacking actually look like? Just click the video next to me to watch this must-see interview.